Sarah Martinez walked through the gates of the Naval Training Academy with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. At 28, she looked younger than most of the other recruits, but her eyes held a depth that came from years of experience. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground as she made her way toward the dormitory building. She had been planning this moment for months. After 15 years of distinguished service, rising through the ranks faster than anyone in naval history, Admiral Sarah Martinez had made an unprecedented decision. She would go undercover as a new recruit to investigate serious allegations of hazing, discrimination, and abuse within the Academy's training program. The decision hadn't been easy. As one of the youngest admirals in the Navy's history, Sarah had built her reputation on fairness, excellence, and protecting those under her command. When reports reached her desk about systematic mistreatment of female recruits, minority candidates, and anyone deemed different by the established cliques, she knew she had to act. But this wasn't just about following protocol or conducting a standard investigation. The reports detailed incidents so severe that several promising young sailors had quit the service entirely. Others had been hospitalized. The official investigations had yielded nothing. A wall of silence protected the perpetrators. Sarah realized that the only way to uncover the truth was to experience it herself. She had spent weeks preparing for this mission. Her service records were sealed under the highest classification levels. Her appearance was subtly altered, different hairstyle, colored contact lenses, and careful makeup to make her look younger and less confident. Even her posture was different, slightly slouched to appear uncertain rather than commanding. The cover story was perfect. Sarah Stevens was a college dropout from a small town in Ohio who had joined the Navy to prove herself and find direction in life. She had no military background, no connections, and no special skills that would make her stand out. On paper, she was exactly the type of recruit that the Academy's bullies typically targeted. As she approached the dormitory, Sarah observed everything with the trained eye of an officer. The building was imposing, designed to intimidate new arrivals. The windows were small and high, making the interior feel claustrophobic. Groups of senior recruits lounged near the entrance, their eyes calculating as they sized up each newcomer. Fresh meat. One of them muttered loud enough for Sarah to hear. She forced herself to look nervous, clutching her bag tighter and avoiding eye contact. Inside, her analytical mind was already cataloging potential problems and noting the power dynamics at play. The dormitory assignment process was deliberately chaotic. New recruits were given room numbers and keys with minimal explanation, left to figure out the unwritten rules on their own. Sarah found herself assigned to room 247, a small space she would share with 3 other women. Her first roommate was already there when Sarah arrived. Jennifer Walsh, a 19-year-old from Texas, looked as nervous as Sarah was pretending to be. Jennifer's hands shook slightly as she introduced herself, and Sarah noticed dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Is this your first week too?" Sarah asked, maintaining her cover as the uncertain newcomer. Jennifer nodded. "Third day. It's been intense." She glanced toward the door and lowered her voice. "Some of the senior recruits here, they're not very friendly, especially to the girls." Before Sarah could respond, their other roommates arrived. Lisa Chun was a quiet computer science graduate from California who spoke in whispers and seemed to jump at every sound. The fourth roommate, Maria Santos from Puerto Rico, carried herself with more confidence, but still looked wary. The dynamics became clear quickly. The 4 women were all considered outsiders by the established power structure. 2 minorities, 1 obvious introvert, and 1 older recruit who seemed unsure of herself. They had been grouped together deliberately, Sarah realized. It made them easier to target. Their first encounter with the Academy's unofficial hierarchy came that evening during dinner. The dining hall was arranged in an unspoken but rigid social order. Senior recruits sat at tables near the windows, their conversations loud and confident. Newer arrivals clustered at tables in the back, speaking quietly among themselves. Sarah and her roommates had barely sat down when 3 second-year recruits approached their table. The leader was Amanda Brooks, a tall blonde woman with cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. Her followers, Tracy and Nicole, flanked her like bodyguards. Well, Amanda said, her voice carrying across the nearby tables. "Look what we have here. For little lost lambs who don't know where they belong." Sarah watched the interaction carefully, noting how other recruits either looked away or watched with the hungry anticipation of spectators at a gladiator match. No instructors were visible in the dining hall. This was the recruits' time, governed by their own brutal social rules. "We're just eating dinner," Maria said quietly, but with a hint of defiance that Sarah recognized as dangerous in this environment. Amanda's smile widened. "Just eating dinner," she repeated mockingly. "Did you hear that, girls? They're just eating dinner. How precious." Tracy leaned forward. "Someone should explain the rules to them. This isn't high school anymore. This is the real Navy, and here, respect is earned." The confrontation continued for several more minutes, with Amanda and her followers making increasingly pointed comments about the newcomers' appearance, backgrounds, and perceived weaknesses. Other recruits at nearby tables had stopped their own conversations to watch, some looking uncomfortable, but none willing to intervene. Sarah observed it all, her trained mind analyzing the power dynamics, identifying the key players, and noting the systematic nature of the harassment. This wasn't random bullying. It was organized, deliberate, and designed to break down anyone who didn't fit the mold. When Amanda finally led her group away, the dining hall slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation. Sarah's roommates sat in silence, poking at their food without appetite. "Does this happen every day?" Lisa asked, her voice barely audible. Jennifer nodded. "Sometimes it's worse. Yesterday, they made a girl from room 231 stand at attention for an hour because her bunk wasn't made to their standards. The instructors were in meetings, so nobody stopped it." Sarah filed away this information. The timing of these incidents was clearly calculated to avoid official oversight. The perpetrators knew exactly when they could operate without consequences. Over the next several days, Sarah witnessed a systematic campaign of psychological warfare against recruits who were deemed unworthy by the self-appointed elite. The tactics were sophisticated and cruel: isolation, humiliation, arbitrary rules that changed without notice, and constant criticism designed to erode confidence and self-worth. Jennifer became the primary target for Amanda's group. Her obvious anxiety made her an easy victim, and her mistakes during training exercises were magnified and used as justification for increasingly harsh treatment. Sarah watched her roommates' spirits slowly cracking under the relentless pressure. The official training program continued alongside this unofficial reign of terror. Instructors taught classes on naval protocol, seamanship, and leadership principles that emphasized respect, dignity, and the importance of supporting fellow sailors. The irony was lost on no one, least of all Sarah, who recognized the massive disconnect between stated values and actual practice. During physical training sessions, the harassment took on more dangerous dimensions. Accidents became common. A trip that sent someone sprawling on the track, equipment that mysteriously malfunctioned, and training exercises where certain recruits found themselves isolated and unsupported by their teammates. Sarah began documenting everything she witnessed, using a technique she had learned in intelligence training to memorize details without taking obvious notes. Names, dates, specific incidents, and the complex web of relationships that enabled the abuse to continue unchecked. She also started building relationships with other recruits, both victims and perpetrators. Her cover identity as an uncertain newcomer gave her access to conversations that would never have happened around an officer. She learned about previous incidents that had been covered up, recruits who had mysteriously transferred out, and the informal power structure that really governed daily life at the academy. The breaking point came during Sarah's second week. Jennifer had been selected for a special inspection by Amanda's group, a ritual humiliation where the victim's belongings were scattered across the dormitory floor while senior recruits pointed out every perceived flaw and inadequacy. Sarah stood in the doorway of room 247, watching as Jennifer knelt on the floor, trying to gather her scattered clothes while Amanda and her followers circled like predators. Tears streamed down Jennifer's face, but she didn't make a sound. "This is pathetic," Amanda announced to the crowd of recruits who had gathered to watch. "How is someone like this supposed to serve in the real Navy? She can't even keep her own room in order." Tracy kicked one of Jennifer's textbooks across the room. "Maybe she should just quit now and save everyone the trouble. Some people aren't cut out for military service. Every instinct Sarah had developed over 15 years of command screamed at her to intervene immediately. Her hands clenched into fists as she fought the urge to step forward and put these bullies in their place. But she knew that breaking cover now would compromise the entire investigation. Instead, she moved carefully into the room and knelt beside Jennifer, helping to gather the scattered belongings. "Leave her alone," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough authority to make Amanda pause. "Excuse me." Amanda's voice was dangerous now. "Did the old lady just tell us what to do?" Sarah looked up, meeting Amanda's eyes directly for the first time. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, and something of her true nature showed through. Amanda actually took a step back, confusion flickering across her face. "I said leave her alone," Sarah repeated, standing slowly. Around the room, the atmosphere had shifted. Other recruits sensed that something was different, though they couldn't identify what. Amanda recovered quickly, her cruel smile returning. Well, looks like we have a hero. 2 losers for the price of 1. But Sarah had already turned her back, helping Jennifer to her feet and guiding her toward the door. The message was clear, this confrontation wasn't over. As they walked away, Sarah heard Amanda's voice behind them, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't finished. Nobody disrespects us and gets away with it." That night, as Jennifer cried quietly in her bunk and the other roommates lay awake in tense silence, Sarah stared at the ceiling and planned her next moves. She had gathered enough evidence to prove that systematic abuse was occurring, but she needed more. She needed to understand the full scope of the problem and identify everyone involved. More importantly, she needed to find a way to protect the victims without compromising her mission. The investigation was crucial, but she couldn't stand by and watch young people be destroyed in the process. Sarah Martinez, Admiral of the United States Navy, closed her eyes and prepared for the battles ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she would be ready for all of them. The next morning brought Sarah's first real test of maintaining her cover while protecting her fellow recruits. She woke before dawn, as she had every day for the past 15 years of military service, but forced herself to lie in bed until the official wake-up call. Around her, her roommates stirred reluctantly, dreading another day of harassment and humiliation. Jennifer looked particularly fragile, her eyes red from crying and her movements hesitant. The previous night's incident had clearly shaken her more than the others, and Sarah knew that Amanda would likely target her again today. The predators always returned to their wounded prey. During morning inspection, the systematic harassment began immediately. Amanda's group had arrived early and positioned themselves strategically throughout the dormitory, ready to pounce on any perceived weakness. They moved with military precision, their campaign of terror as organized as any official operation. "Well, look who decided to play soldier today," Amanda announced as Jennifer emerged from their room. "Did sleeping on the floor teach you anything about keeping your belongings organized?" Jennifer's face flushed red, but she kept walking toward the bathroom. Sarah followed, noting how other recruits quickly moved out of the way, unwilling to risk becoming targets themselves. The atmosphere of fear was so thick, it was almost tangible. In the bathroom, Sarah found Jennifer leaning against a sink, taking deep breaths and trying to compose herself. Several other victims of the ongoing harassment campaign stood at nearby sinks, all of them looking like refugees from a war zone. "How much longer can we take this?" whispered Lisa, who had been forced to redo her bunk 6 times the previous morning because Amanda claimed it wasn't meeting standards that seemed to change with each inspection. "Maybe they're right," Jennifer said quietly. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just quit." Sarah felt her carefully maintained composure crack slightly. These were exactly the words that Amanda and her followers wanted to hear. They weren't just bullying these young women. They were systematically destroying their confidence and driving them out of the service entirely. "Don't let them win," Sarah said, her voice carrying more authority than her cover identity should have possessed. "That's exactly what they want. They're trying to make you quit because they're afraid of what you might become." The other women looked at her with surprise. There was something in her tone that didn't match her supposed background as an uncertain newcomer. "What do you mean?" Maria asked. Sarah paused, realizing she had revealed too much. She needed to scale back her natural leadership instincts while still providing the support these women desperately needed. I mean, they wouldn't waste this much energy on people they didn't see as threats, she said more carefully. Think about it. Why target us specifically? There are plenty of other recruits they could pick on. It was a calculated observation, designed to plant seeds of resistance without revealing her true expertise in psychological warfare and military tactics. She watched as the idea took hold in their minds. Over the following days, Sarah began implementing a subtle campaign of her own. Using techniques learned in advanced leadership courses and intelligence operations, she started building a support network among the targeted recruits. Nothing obvious enough to attract attention from Amanda's group, but enough to begin shifting the power dynamics. She started with small gestures, helping someone fix a mistake before it could be noticed, sharing information about unwritten rules, and providing quiet encouragement when others were struggling. Her actions appeared spontaneous and natural, but were actually carefully calculated to build trust and demonstrate that resistance was possible. The real challenge came during combat training exercises. These sessions were conducted in a large gymnasium where recruits learned basic self-defense and close-quarters combat techniques. It was also where the harassment took on its most dangerous dimensions, hidden from instructor oversight by the chaos of physical activity. Sarah had been dreading this environment ever since her arrival. Her 15 years of military service included extensive training in multiple combat disciplines. She was an expert in hand-to-hand combat, weapons training, and tactical operations. Suppressing these skills while appearing to be a fumbling beginner would require incredible self-control. The instructor, Sergeant Rodriguez, was a career military man who clearly took his job seriously. He demonstrated techniques with precision and emphasized the importance of protecting fellow sailors in dangerous situations. But Sarah noticed that he rotated through different groups during practice sessions, leaving each group unsupervised for significant periods. It was during one of these unsupervised periods that Amanda struck. "Stevens," she called out, using Sarah's cover name. "You're paired with Jennifer for defensive drills." Sarah recognized the setup immediately. Amanda had been watching the friendship developing between her and Jennifer and had decided to use it as a weapon. The defensive drill involved one person acting as an attacker while their partner demonstrated proper blocking and evasion techniques. What Amanda hadn't announced was that she intended to observe the drill and provide helpful corrections to Jennifer's form. In reality, she planned to use the session to inflict pain while maintaining plausible deniability. "Your stance is all wrong," Amanda announced as Jennifer awkwardly attempted the basic defensive position. "Here, let me show you how it's really done." Without warning, Amanda grabbed Jennifer's arm and twisted it into what appeared to be a proper defensive hold. But Sarah's trained eye immediately recognized that the grip was designed to cause maximum discomfort while looking instructional to casual observers. Jennifer gasped in pain but tried to hide it, knowing that any complaint would only make things worse. Around them, other recruits practiced their own drills, most deliberately avoiding looking in their direction. "Feel that?" Amanda said, increasing the pressure slightly. "That's what real control feels like. Maybe if you practiced more instead of crying all the time, you'd understand these concepts better." Sarah watched this torture disguised as instruction, her mind racing through options. Every instinct screamed at her to intervene immediately. She knew exactly how to break Amanda's hold, and several ways to disable her before she could react. But any move she made now would reveal training that her cover identity shouldn't possess. Instead, she stepped forward and tried a different approach. "Amanda, I think she understands the position now," Sarah said carefully. "Maybe you could show me the next technique?" It was a calculated risk, drawing Amanda's attention to herself while giving Jennifer a chance to recover. Amanda's cold eyes fixed on Sarah with predatory interest. "Oh, the old lady wants a personal demonstration." Amanda's voice carried across the gymnasium, attracting attention from other groups. "How touching. The two losers want to help each other." Sarah nodded, maintaining the uncertain expression that was part of her cover. But inside, she was preparing for what was coming. Amanda was going to use this opportunity to inflict pain on her as well, probably more than she had used on Jennifer. "All right, Stevens, let's see how tough you really are." Amanda moved with surprising speed, attempting to lock Sarah in the same painful hold she had used on Jennifer. But She had made a critical error. She was facing someone with years of advanced combat training who was only pretending to be helpless. Sarah allowed Amanda to begin the hold, then made what appeared to be a clumsy attempt to escape. In reality, she was carefully controlling every movement, making Amanda think she was dominant while positioning herself for a counter that would look entirely accidental. Pathetic, Amanda muttered, increasing the pressure. No wonder you two found each other. Neither of you belongs here. That was when Sarah made her move. Using a technique that appeared to be desperate thrashing, she shifted her weight in a way that forced Amanda to overbalance. Amanda, caught off guard by the sudden change in dynamics, stumbled forward and lost her grip. What happened next looked like a simple training accident. Amanda, thrown off balance, stepped wrong and twisted her ankle. She went down hard, crying out in pain and surprise. To any observer, it appeared that the clumsy recruit had gotten lucky and the experienced tormentor had suffered an unfortunate mishap. But Sarah knew exactly what she had done. She had used Amanda's own aggression against her, employing an advanced defensive technique while making it look like beginner's luck. It was a perfect execution that would be impossible to prove was anything other than accidental. Sergeant Rodriguez rushed over immediately, having heard Amanda's cry of pain. He quickly assessed the injury and determined that Amanda needed medical attention for what appeared to be a sprained ankle. "What happened here?" he asked, looking around at the gathered recruits. "Just a training accident, Sergeant," Sarah said, her voice carrying exactly the right note of concern and confusion. "Amanda was helping me with defensive positions when she lost her footing." Several other recruits nodded in agreement, though Sarah noticed that some of them were looking at her with new interest. The incident had shifted something in the room's dynamics, even if most people couldn't quite identify what. As Amanda was helped to the medical facility, her followers Tracy and Nicole watched Sarah with suspicion. They couldn't prove anything had happened, but they clearly sensed that something was wrong with the official version of events. "That was convenient," Tracy muttered to Nicole, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the dormitory changed noticeably. Amanda's injury kept her out of action for nearly a week, disrupting the organized harassment campaign. Without her leadership, Tracy and Nicole seemed uncertain about how to proceed. More importantly, other recruits began to see that the bullies weren't invincible. Sarah's apparent accident had demonstrated that even the most feared tormentors could be vulnerable. She began to notice small acts of resistance, recruits standing up straighter, making eye contact instead of looking away, and quietly supporting each other in ways they hadn't dared before. But Sarah knew this respite was temporary. Amanda would return, probably more vindictive than ever. And Tracy and Nicole were watching Sarah carefully now, looking for any sign that her apparent helplessness was an act. The real test came during a navigation exercise conducted in the Academy's computer laboratory. Recruits were required to work in teams to plot courses and solve tactical problems using sophisticated simulation software. It was exactly the type of environment where Sarah's extensive experience with naval operations and strategic planning could accidentally reveal itself. She was paired with Jennifer and two other targeted recruits, while Amanda's allies were grouped together at a nearby workstation. The exercise involved complex calculations and required familiarity with naval procedures that most genuine newcomers wouldn't possess. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. If she performed too well, she would expose her true background. If she performed poorly, her team would fail the exercise and face additional harassment. She needed to find a middle ground that would allow her team to succeed without revealing her expertise. The solution came from an unexpected source. Jennifer, despite her anxiety and the constant harassment she faced, turned out to have an excellent grasp of mathematics and logical problem solving. When Sarah struggled with the calculations, Jennifer quietly helped her work through the problems. But it was Lisa who provided the real breakthrough. Her computer science background made her natural at navigating the simulation software, and she quickly mastered the interface that was giving other teams trouble. Working together, the four women who had been written off as failures began to outperform every other team in the laboratory. Sarah carefully guided their efforts without taking the lead, allowing her teammates to discover their own strengths while providing subtle support when needed. At the neighboring workstation, Tracy and Nicole struggled with concepts that should have been basic for anyone with real military ambition. Their strategy of intimidation and social dominance had never required actual competence, and now their limitations were becoming obvious. How are those losers doing better than us? Nicole whispered angrily, watching Sarah's team efficiently solve problems that had them completely stumped. The answer was becoming clear to everyone in the room. The supposed weak recruits were demonstrating skills and teamwork that their tormentors couldn't match. The facade of superiority that had supported the harassment campaign was beginning to crack. When the exercise results were posted, Sarah's team had achieved the highest score in the class. More importantly, they had done it through genuine collaboration and mutual support, exactly the kind of teamwork that the Navy claimed to value. Sergeant Rodriguez made a point of congratulating all the team members individually, praising their cooperation and problem-solving abilities. For Jennifer, Lisa, and Maria, it was the first positive recognition they had received since arriving at the academy. But Sarah knew that success would come with a price. As they left the computer laboratory, she could see Tracy and Nicole whispering urgently with other members of Amanda's network. The balance of power was shifting, and the establishment wasn't going to give up without a fight. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected visit in her dormitory room. Tracy and Nicole appeared at her door, their expressions cold and calculating. "We need to talk," Tracy said, pushing past Sarah into the room. Her roommates were all present, and the tension immediately became thick enough to cut. "That was quite a performance today," Nicole added, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Funny how quickly you've improved since arriving here." Sarah forced herself to look confused and slightly intimidated, though every muscle in her body was ready for action. These women were dangerous, and they were clearly planning something. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "We just worked together on the assignment." Tracy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Work together. Right. And I suppose it's just a coincidence that Amanda got hurt while training with you." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah realized that her cover might be blown, but she couldn't be certain how much they actually knew versus how much they suspected. "That really was an accident," she insisted, maintaining her role as the uncertain recruit. "I would never hurt anyone on purpose." Nicole stepped closer, invading Sarah's personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. "Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to go to the instructors and confess that your team cheated on the navigation exercise. You're going to take full responsibility and request to be transferred to a different unit." "And if I don't?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "If you don't," Tracy said with a smile that was pure predator, "things are going to get very difficult for you and your little friends here. Amanda may be out of action for now, but we have plenty of other ways to make your lives miserable." The threat was clear and immediate. Sarah looked around at her roommates, seeing fear in their eyes. Jennifer was already crying silently, probably convinced that her brief moment of success was about to be destroyed. Sarah stood quietly for a moment, appearing to consider the ultimatum. But her mind was racing through options and calculations. The situation had reached a critical point where her mission parameters needed to be reassessed. She could maintain her cover and sacrifice her teammates' success and possibly their safety. She could partially reveal herself to protect them while continuing the investigation. Or she could abandon the mission entirely and use her authority to address the problems immediately. None of these options were ideal, but Sarah had learned long ago that leadership often meant choosing between bad choices and worse ones. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. Tracy and Nicole exchanged glances, apparently satisfied that they had successfully intimidated her. "You have until morning," Nicole said as they prepared to leave. "And Stevens? Don't try anything stupid. You're in way over your head here." After they left, Sarah's roommates sat in stunned silence. The brief period of hope and success was crashing down around them, and the reality of their powerless situation was reasserting itself. But Sarah Martinez, Admiral of the United States Navy, was already formulating a plan that would change everything. Sarah spent that night staring at the ceiling while her roommates slept fitfully around her. The ultimatum from Tracy and Nicole had forced her into a corner that required careful consideration of every possible outcome. As an admiral, She was accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. But this situation was more personally challenging than anything she had faced in her military career. By dawn, she had reached a decision that would require her to walk a razor-thin line between maintaining her cover and protecting the people who had become more than just subjects of her investigation. They had become her responsibility. The morning inspection routine proceeded as usual, but Sarah could sense the anticipation crackling through the dormitory. Tracy and Nicole positioned themselves strategically, waiting for Sarah to make her promised confession and destroy her team's achievement. Other recruits seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen, though most couldn't identify what. Amanda had returned from medical leave the previous evening, her ankle wrapped but functional. Her injury had done nothing to diminish her vindictive nature, and she watched Sarah with the focused intensity of a predator that had been denied its prey for too long. Sarah made her way to the instructor's office as expected, but not for the reason anyone anticipated. Instead of confessing to cheating, she had decided to implement a careful strategy that would protect her teammates while gathering the evidence she needed to complete her mission. Sergeant Rodriguez was reviewing training reports when Sarah knocked on his door. He looked up with mild surprise, since individual recruits rarely requested private meetings during morning inspection time. "Stevens, what can I do for you?" Sarah stepped into the office and carefully closed the door behind her. This conversation would require precision and subtlety that her cover identity shouldn't possess, but she had no other choice. "Sergeant, I need to report some serious concerns about what's happening in the dormitory." Rodriguez's expression became more focused. "What kind of concerns?" "Some of the recruits are being systematically harassed and intimidated by others. It's affecting their ability to focus on training, and I'm worried it might escalate into something dangerous." It was a careful statement that revealed knowledge of the situation without indicating how much Sarah actually understood about military protocol and reporting procedures. Rodriguez listened intently as she described specific incidents she had witnessed, though she was careful not to reveal details that would indicate professional expertise in recognizing psychological warfare tactics. "These are serious allegations," Rodriguez said when she finished. "Why are you reporting this instead of the victims themselves?" "They're afraid," Sarah replied honestly. "The people doing this have made it clear that reporting it would only make things worse. But after yesterday's navigation exercise, I think the harassment is going to escalate." Rodriguez nodded slowly. Sarah's report aligned with concerns he had been developing based on his own observations, though he hadn't been able to gather concrete evidence. The unofficial power structure among recruits had always been challenging to monitor, but lately he had noticed signs that it was becoming more toxic than usual. "I'll need you to provide written statements about what you've witnessed," he said. "And I'll need to interview the other people involved. Are you prepared for the fact that this could make you a target as well?" Sarah nodded, though privately she acknowledged that she was already a target. "I understand the risks, but this needs to stop." What she didn't tell Rodriguez was that she planned to use the official investigation as cover for her own expanded intelligence gathering. With the instructor's attention focused on the harassment campaign, she would have opportunities to document the full scope of the problem while appearing to cooperate with standard procedures. When Sarah returned to the dormitory, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Tracy and Nicole were watching for her return, clearly expecting to see her demoralized and defeated after making her forced confession. Instead, they saw someone who appeared more determined than before. "Well," Tracy demanded as Sarah passed their position near the stairwell. "Did you take care of our little problem?" Sarah looked directly at her, allowing just a hint of her true nature to show through her careful mask. "I took care of it." The ambiguous response left Tracy and Nicole uncertain about what had actually transpired. Sarah had technically told the truth while deliberately misleading them about her actions. It was a classic intelligence technique that bought her time while keeping her adversaries off balance. Over the following days, Sarah implemented a complex strategy that required her to maintain her cover while secretly coordinating with the official investigation. She continued to appear as a struggling recruit who was trying to fit in, but she began providing subtle guidance to her roommates that helped them develop their own defenses against harassment. The key was teaching them techniques that appeared to be common sense or lucky discoveries rather than trained responses. When Jennifer was targeted for another humiliation ritual, Sarah helped her prepare by suggesting practice sessions that were actually combat training disguised as moral support. "Let's run through what might happen tomorrow," Sarah suggested one evening as they prepared for bed. "If Amanda tries to make you stand at attention again, remember that you can maintain your balance better if you distribute your weight evenly." She demonstrated the proper stance while making it appear that she was just offering encouragement. In reality, she was teaching Jennifer military bearing and psychological resilience techniques that would make her much harder to intimidate. Lisa benefited from similar guidance about confidence and assertiveness. Sarah showed her how to make eye contact and speak clearly without seeming to challenge authority directly. These were leadership skills that Sarah had learned in advanced officer training, but she presented them as common-sense advice that anyone might offer. Maria, who had always shown the most natural resistance to harassment, received more advanced coaching about recognizing manipulation tactics and building coalitions among other recruits. Sarah was essentially teaching her to organize resistance while making it appear that Maria was developing these skills independently. The results became apparent within a week. The three women who had been the primary targets of Amanda's campaign were transforming themselves into much more difficult victims. They stood straighter, spoke with greater confidence, and supported each other in ways that made them significantly harder to isolate and intimidate. But Sarah's most important work was happening behind the scenes, where she was building a comprehensive intelligence picture of the entire harassment network. Using techniques learned in counterintelligence operations, she mapped the relationships between perpetrators, identified their methods of communication, and documented their coordination strategies. The organization was more sophisticated than she had initially realized. Amanda wasn't just a bully who had gathered followers. She was running what amounted to a psychological operations campaign designed to eliminate specific types of recruits from the academy. The targeting wasn't random. It was systematic and based on carefully developed profiles. Female recruits were targeted more heavily than males, but the harassment wasn't simply about gender discrimination. The real pattern involved anyone who didn't fit the narrow mold that Amanda's group had defined as acceptable. Independent thinkers, people from diverse backgrounds, anyone who showed unusual skills or perspectives, all of them became targets for elimination. Sarah discovered that the problem extended far beyond her dormitory. Amanda's network included recruits from multiple units and training cycles. They shared information about targets, coordinated harassment campaigns across different groups, and had developed a sophisticated system for avoiding detection by instructors. Most disturbing of all, Sarah found evidence that this network had been operating for years. Previous classes had included victims who had been driven out of the academy entirely, their potential military careers destroyed before they could begin. The official records showed these departures as voluntary withdrawals or failures to meet standards, but Sarah's investigation revealed the truth behind many of these losses. The scope of the problem made Sarah realize that her original mission parameters had been insufficient. This wasn't just about documenting harassment in one training cycle. It was about exposing a systematic corruption that was undermining the Navy's recruitment and training objectives. But her expanded investigation also increased the personal risks she was facing. Amanda's group was becoming increasingly suspicious of Sarah's behavior, and they were starting to probe more aggressively into her background. The crisis came during a field training exercise conducted at a remote location several miles from the main academy campus. The exercise involved overnight camping, navigation challenges, and team-building activities that would take place away from normal instructor supervision. Sarah recognized immediately that this environment would provide Amanda's group with opportunities for harassment and intimidation that would be impossible to monitor or prevent. The isolation and limited oversight would allow them to escalate their campaign without fear of immediate consequences. She was correct. Within hours of arriving at the campsite, Amanda's network began implementing what they clearly considered a final solution to their problem with resistant recruits. The first incident involved Jennifer's camping gear mysteriously disappearing shortly after the groups had set up their initial campsites. When she reported the missing equipment to the supervising sergeant, Amanda helpfully suggested that Jennifer had probably lost it due to poor organizational skills. Some people just can't handle the responsibility of keeping track of their own gear, Amanda said with false sympathy. Maybe she should consider whether military service is really right for her. The sergeant, focused on managing multiple groups spread across a large area, accepted this explanation and told Jennifer she would have to share equipment with other recruits or spend the night without proper shelter. Sarah watched this manipulation with growing anger. Amanda was using the exercise's constraints against her victims, creating situations where official channels couldn't provide effective protection. It was a sophisticated understanding of how to exploit systemic weaknesses. But Amanda wasn't finished. As evening approached and the groups gathered for dinner around a central fire pit, she began implementing the next phase of her plan. "You know, Stevens," she said, her voice carrying across the campsite, "you've been pretty quiet about your background since you arrived here. Where did you say you were from again?" It was a calculated probe, designed to put Sarah on the spot in front of a large audience. Amanda had clearly been researching Sarah's cover story and was looking for inconsistencies that might reveal useful information. Sarah provided the basic biographical details she had memorized, but Amanda pressed for more specific information about her supposed hometown, previous jobs, and family background. Each question was designed to probe deeper into the cover identity, looking for weaknesses or contradictions. "Ohio, right?" Amanda continued. "Funny, I have cousins in Ohio. What part exactly?" The questioning continued for several minutes, with other members of Amanda's network joining in with their own probing questions. To most observers, it appeared to be normal conversation around the campfire, but Sarah recognized it as an interrogation designed to expose her true identity. She handled the questions professionally, providing consistent answers that maintained her cover while avoiding details that could be easily verified. But she knew that Amanda was building a file of information that would eventually reveal inconsistencies if the pressure continued. The real danger came later that evening, when the supervising instructors retired to their own campsite several hundred yards away. With official oversight removed, Amanda's group was free to implement whatever plans they had developed for dealing with their persistent problems. Sarah had been expecting this moment and had spent the day subtly positioning herself and her allies for what was coming. But even her military training hadn't prepared her for the psychological sophistication of Amanda's final gambit. Instead of direct confrontation, Amanda chose manipulation and psychological warfare. She began spreading rumors about Sarah and her roommates, telling other recruits that they had been cheating on exercises, stealing equipment, and undermining unit cohesion. The rumors were carefully crafted to contain just enough plausible detail to seem credible while being impossible to quickly disprove. By the time Sarah became aware of what was happening, most of the other recruits had been convinced that she and her friends were problems that needed to be dealt with. The isolation was immediate and devastating. Recruits who had been friendly or neutral suddenly began treating Sarah's group as pariahs. Conversations stopped when they approached, equipment sharing was refused, and they found themselves excluded from activities and information that everyone else took for granted. Jennifer, already fragile from weeks of harassment, began to crack under the additional pressure. She sat alone by the dying fire, tears streaming down her face as she realized how completely they had been cut off from any support. "Maybe Amanda's right," she whispered to Sarah. "Maybe we don't belong here. Maybe we should just quit and save everyone the trouble." Sarah felt 15 years of military leadership experience screaming at her to take action immediately. The systematic destruction of these young women's confidence and morale was exactly the kind of situation that her oath of service required her to prevent. But she also knew that revealing her true identity now would compromise an investigation that had uncovered corruption extending far beyond this single incident. The evidence she had gathered could protect future recruits and clean up systemic problems that had been destroying military careers for years. As she looked around the campsite, watching Amanda's network savoring their apparent victory while their victims contemplated abandoning their dreams of military service, Sarah realized that the time for passive observation had ended. Admiral Sarah Martinez had gathered enough intelligence to understand the scope of the problem. Now it was time for her to take decisive action, even if it meant sacrificing the secrecy that had made her investigation possible. Tomorrow, everything would change. Dawn broke over the training camp with an unusual quiet that seemed to settle over the entire area like morning fog. Sarah had spent the night planning carefully, knowing that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of her investigation, but also the future military careers of the young women who had trusted her. She rose before the official wake-up call, moving silently through the campsite as she had done countless times during special operations missions. But this morning, she wasn't gathering intelligence or preparing for combat. She was preparing to reveal the truth. The first phase of her plan required careful timing and precise execution. She made her way to the instructor's campsite, where Sergeant Rodriguez was already awake and reviewing the day's training schedule. "Stevens," he said with surprise, seeing her approach in the pre-dawn light. "Is everything all right?" "Sergeant, I need to speak with you privately about an urgent matter," Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that made Rodriguez immediately focus his full attention on her. They walked a short distance from the other sleeping instructors before Sarah continued. "The situation I reported earlier has escalated significantly. Last night, the harassment group implemented a coordinated campaign of psychological warfare against their targets that goes far beyond anything I described in my initial report." Sarah provided Rodriguez with a detailed briefing that included specific incidents, names, and tactical assessments of Amanda's network operations. As she spoke, Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly serious as he realized the sophistication and scope of what had been happening under his supervision. "Stevens, how do you know so much about psychological warfare tactics?" Rodriguez asked when she finished. "Your file indicates you're a civilian with no military background." Sarah paused, knowing that her next words would fundamentally change everything. "Sergeant, my real name is Admiral Sarah Martinez, United States Navy. I've been conducting an undercover investigation of harassment and abuse within the Academy training program." The silence that followed her revelation was profound. Rodriguez stared at her, his mind processing the implications of what she had just told him. Slowly, his posture shifted as military protocol reasserted itself. "Ma'am, I need to see identification," he said formally. Sarah produced the special credentials she had kept hidden throughout her undercover assignment. Rodriguez examined them carefully, cross-referencing the identification codes with his secure communication device. The verification process took several minutes, during which Sarah could see him struggling to reconcile the uncertain recruit he had been observing with the reality of her actual rank and position. "Admiral," he said when the verification was complete, his voice now carrying the respect due her rank, "why wasn't I informed about this investigation?" "Because the scope of the problem required direct observation that wouldn't have been possible with official oversight," Sarah replied. "I needed to experience the harassment firsthand and document evidence that would stand up to scrutiny." Rodriguez nodded slowly, though she could see he was still processing the situation. "What are your orders, ma'am?" "I need you to arrange an immediate formation of all recruits at 0800 hours, Sarah said. "Tell them it's for an important announcement, but don't provide any additional details. Also, I need you to contact Admiral Thompson at Pacific Fleet Command and request his immediate presence here via secure transport." "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied. "May I ask what you're planning?" Sarah's expression was grim, but determined. "I'm going to end this corruption permanently." As Rodriguez departed to make the necessary arrangements, Sarah returned to the recruit campsite where her roommates were beginning to wake up. Jennifer looked particularly haggard, the previous night's psychological assault having taken a visible toll on her confidence and resolve. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what Amanda said last night," Jennifer began as soon as she saw her. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I should just request a transfer or quit entirely." "Don't make any decisions right now," Sarah said firmly. "I promise you that everything is going to change today." Lisa and Maria gathered around, both of them looking defeated despite their attempts to maintain composure. The systematic destruction of their morale had been brutally effective. "What's going to change?" Maria asked. "Nothing we've tried has made any difference. They control everything here." Sarah looked at her three roommates, these young women who had shown such promise before being targeted for destruction by Amanda's network. In a few hours, they would learn the truth about who she really was. But for now, she could only ask them to trust her. "I can't explain everything yet," she said carefully. "But I need you to promise me something. When formation is called this morning, stay close to me and don't react to anything Amanda or her friends might say or do. Can you do that?" The three women nodded, though confusion was evident in their expressions. Sarah's confident tone was so different from the uncertain recruit, they had known that they were beginning to sense something fundamental was changing. Across the campsite, Amanda's network was beginning their own morning routines. Sarah observed them with the trained eye of a military intelligence officer, noting their confidence and satisfaction with the previous night's psychological victory. They believed they had finally broken their primary targets and could now enjoy watching the aftermath. Amanda herself appeared to be in particularly high spirits, laughing loudly with Tracy and Nicole about something as they prepared their equipment for the day's training exercises. She occasionally glanced towards Sarah's group with triumphant satisfaction, clearly savoring what she believed was her complete victory. At precisely 0800 hours, Sergeant Rodriguez's voice rang out across the campsite. All personnel report for formation immediately. The recruits gathered quickly, forming the orderly lines they had been taught during their first week of training. Sarah positioned herself and her roommates as she had instructed, while Amanda's group clustered together near the front of the formation. Rodriguez stood before the assembled recruits, his expression serious as he addressed them. This morning you will receive an important announcement that will affect everyone present. I want absolute silence and attention during this briefing. He paused, scanning the faces before him. I'm now going to introduce someone who has something to say to all of you. Sarah stepped forward from her position in the formation, her posture shifting dramatically as 15 years of military bearing reasserted itself. The transformation was immediate and startling. The uncertain recruit disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who radiated command authority. The reaction among the gathered recruits was immediate and varied. Most stared in confusion, trying to reconcile this confident, commanding figure with the struggling newcomer they thought they knew. Amanda's group looked particularly stunned, their triumphant expressions quickly shifting to uncertainty and growing alarm. My name is Admiral Sarah Martinez, Sarah announced, her voice carrying clearly across the campsite with the projection and authority of someone accustomed to addressing large formations. For the past 3 weeks, I have been conducting an undercover investigation of harassment, discrimination, and abuse within this training program. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the morning birds seemed to have stopped singing as the full implications of her revelation sank in across the assembled group. Amanda's face had gone completely white. The confident predator who had dominated the dormitory social structure for months suddenly found herself face-to-face with someone whose authority was absolute and whose knowledge of her activities was comprehensive. During my investigation, Sarah continued, I have documented systematic campaigns of psychological warfare designed to force qualified recruits to abandon their military service. These campaigns have been sophisticated, coordinated, and deliberately hidden from official oversight. She began walking along the formation lines as she spoke, making eye contact with individual recruits as she had done countless times during her career when addressing sailors under her command. I have witnessed harassment disguised as training. I have seen equipment sabotage presented as personal failure. I have observed psychological manipulation designed to destroy confidence and morale. Most importantly, I have identified a network of individuals who have made it their mission to determine who is worthy of serving in our Navy. As she spoke, Sarah could see the impact of her words rippling through the formation. Recruits who had witnessed harassment but felt powerless to report it were realizing that someone in authority had seen everything. Victims of the abuse were beginning to understand that their experiences had been documented and would finally be addressed. But it was Amanda's network that showed the most dramatic response. The confidence and arrogance that had defined their behavior was crumbling as they realized the scope of what they were facing. They had been so focused on their petty power games that they had never considered the possibility of real accountability. Let me be absolutely clear about something, Sarah continued, her voice taking on the steel that her subordinates had learned to recognize as a warning. The United States Navy does not tolerate harassment, discrimination, or abuse in any form. Every sailor, regardless of background, gender, or experience level, deserves the opportunity to serve with dignity and respect. She stopped walking and faced the formation directly. Over the next several days, there will be a comprehensive investigation of everything that has occurred here. Every incident will be documented, every perpetrator will be identified, and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. The sound of a helicopter approaching interrupted her speech. Admiral Thompson, Sarah's superior officer and the commander of Pacific Fleet Operations, was arriving as she had requested. That helicopter is bringing additional senior officers who will oversee the investigation and ensure that justice is served, Sarah announced. Anyone who has information about harassment or abuse is encouraged to come forward. Anyone who has participated in these activities should prepare to face the consequences. As the helicopter landed and Admiral Thompson emerged with his staff, the full weight of military authority was brought to bear on the situation. The playground rules that had governed recruit interactions were being swept away and replaced with actual accountability. Amanda finally found her voice, though it was much weaker than the confident tone she had used when tormenting her victims. Admiral, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We were just trying to help the weaker recruits understand military standards. Sarah turned to look directly at Amanda, and, for the first time, the young woman saw the full force of command authority focused on her personally. Recruit Brooks, Sarah said, using Amanda's formal designation rather than her first name. Your understanding of military standards appears to be fundamentally flawed. Military standards require respect for fellow service members, support for those who are struggling, and integrity in all interactions. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Your behavior has violated every one of those principles. The investigation that followed was swift and comprehensive. Admiral Thompson brought with him a team of investigators who specialized in internal military affairs. Within hours, they had set up interview stations and began the process of documenting every aspect of the harassment network. Sarah's undercover evidence provided the foundation for the investigation, but the testimony of victims and witnesses filled in the complete picture. Recruit after recruit came forward to describe incidents they had witnessed or experienced, creating a comprehensive record of systematic abuse. The scope of the corruption was even broader than Sarah had initially discovered. Amanda's network had connections to previous training cycles and had been responsible for driving out dozens of qualified recruits over several years. The damage to military readiness and morale was significant. But, perhaps most importantly, the investigation revealed how the victims had been transformed by their experience. Jennifer, Lisa, Maria, and the other targeted recruits demonstrated remarkable courage and integrity as they provided detailed testimony about what they had endured. The young women who Amanda's group had tried to break proved to be exactly the kind of sailors the Navy needed: intelligent, resilient, and committed to the values of service and honor that defined military life. Within a week, the investigation was complete. Amanda and the core members of her network were dismissed from the academy and discharged from military service. Several were referred for criminal prosecution for assault and harassment charges. More broadly, the entire training program underwent comprehensive reforms designed to prevent similar corruption in the future. New oversight procedures, mandatory reporting protocols, and enhanced instructor training were implemented to ensure that every recruit received fair treatment. Sarah's investigation had accomplished its objectives, but the personal cost had been significant. The weeks of maintaining her cover while watching systematic abuse had tested her in ways that combat operations never had. On her final day at the academy, she gathered with her former roommates for a private conversation. Jennifer, Lisa, and Maria had all chosen to continue their military service, their confidence restored, and their commitment to naval values strengthened by their experience. I want to apologize for deceiving you about who I was, Sarah said. You trusted me as a fellow recruit, and I couldn't reveal the truth until the investigation was complete. Jennifer shook her head. You saved our careers, and maybe our lives. Amanda's group was destroying people, and nobody seemed to care until you came along. The important thing is that you found the strength to survive and fight back, Sarah replied. That courage and resilience is exactly what makes you the kind of sailors our Navy needs. As she prepared to leave the academy and return to her regular duties as an admiral, Sarah reflected on what the investigation had revealed about leadership, courage, and the responsibility to protect those who serve. The young women she was leaving behind would go on to have distinguished military careers, their early experiences having taught them valuable lessons about standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Amanda and her followers had learned different lessons about accountability and the consequences of abusing power. Their military careers were over, but the changes implemented as a result of Sarah's investigation would protect future generations of recruits. Admiral Sarah Martinez had successfully completed her mission, exposing corruption and protecting the integrity of naval training. But more than that, she had demonstrated the principles of leadership and service that defined the best traditions of military life. As she boarded the transport that would take her back to fleet headquarters, Sarah knew that her weeks as Recruit Stevens had been among the most important of her military career. Sometimes the most crucial battles were fought not with weapons and tactics, but with courage, integrity, and the determination to ensure that those who serve their country are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The recruits she left behind would carry forward the lessons learned during those difficult weeks, becoming the kind of leaders who would never allow such abuse to occur under their watch. In that way, Sarah's investigation would continue to protect sailors for years to come, its impact extending far beyond the specific incidents she had documented. The transformation was complete. The bullies had been defeated, the victims had been empowered, and the system had been reformed. Admiral Sarah Martinez had proven that true leadership sometimes requires the courage to step down from authority in order to understand and address the problems that authority alone cannot see.